established the embargo on China, which means that it's been quite some decades when the European Union has established an embargo, which means that EU doesn't develop any sort of economic activity concerning the arms industry with China. The reason why we consider that this is the right time to take this measure is that we believe that from the one side this should promote human rights in China, and on the other side we have serious concerns that are starting to get all heated as the time comes by concerning the legitimacy of setting such an embargo on China. So to begin with, let me provide you some sort of an historical context as far as the embargo is concerned. The EU, it all began like this. There were some sort of a very tense backlash and a crackdown on dissenters in China, something like 30 years ago, or like and China in general was considered from the West countries not to pay respect to basic fundamental human rights. That is why the EU has established this embargo so as to alarm China concerning the demeanor of the authorities there before the political dissenters. China, of course, is a country that has many distinct features as far in contrast with the European Union countries. EU is a bloc of countries that share some political and ethical or moral cultural values. These values are actually a product of an ongoing mixing of their people within the European Union's borders. So we see that there's sort of an homogeneity concerning what the European Union people and leaders prioritize. But this moral map of European Union does not necessarily respond to the cultural features of other countries, and maybe China is one of them. China is currently a leading economy, and is actually developing. Getting more and more closer to what we see as a model of political. As a model of liberal democracy. It's getting closer to that. It's not the China of Mao. It's not the communist China where people were oppressed, and it's not the China that would go and apologize for breaching human rights. There may be cases still where China is behaving like harsh to people and to political dissenters. We know of instances where political dissenters are getting imprisoned, but still we see a considerable development, a considerable development concerning human rights in China. There are now institutions, there are now people that watch what is the situation there. We see that there is a middle class developing in China, which is actually very good, a very good omen of what is going to, of how the situation is going to evolve in the years to come. That is why we believe that at this moment it is the right time for the EU to give the right signal to embrace this course of development, this course of amelioration as far as the political the political scenery in China is concerned. So that's why we believe that if we still keep this this embargo on China, it's sort of vengeful or sort of a discrimination against a state that is doing a considerable job to ameliorate and to come closer to our standards of how a state should work and how it should behave towards the citizens.
You mentioned it was discriminatory towards China, but the EU hands out arms and trade embargoes to most undemocratic countries. We embargo a lot of nations in Africa. This isn't discrimination against China as a nation, but just
thank you for your point. That's I think that your point is actually in the line of our reasoning. In China, it's not like the nations of Africa. It's not like all those nations where massacres are like taking place, where civilians are like are treated in a human way. Actually, China right now is held accountable for its bad demeanor toward the citizens, and we see that there is a very clear distinction concerning how the median Chinese people live and how the people from other countries of the world where they have oppressive governments live. We cannot like say that China is the same thing with with countries from Africa. So for all these reasons and for the reasons that my partner will bring forward, I beg you to propose.
Bedankt voor de speech. I call the leader of opposition.
Sorry, I just need to find my stop clock. Okay, so we are standing in favour of this arms embargo. I'm going to come on to some main points, one of which is why it's an arms embargo and not any other kind of embargo, which I don't think was touched upon by the government, and the political statement of any embargo, and not just an embargo on China, we're presenting a more general case for the world. They mentioned that China is not the China of Mao, we agree, but China is by no means a shining Eastern liberal democracy, which we might see in places like Japan or India. We fully stand for the fact that China is still an oppressive regime. It is still a country where voting is a sham at best and doesn't exist at worst. We stand for the fact that China does have very little respect for human rights. We see it in the UN. China very often vetoes many motions concerning human rights. And so we find this kind of idea that China is not the China of Mao and is on its way to being a liberal democracy laughable. Well, yes, it's made steps from Mao, but to be honest, steps from massacring half your population to now it's not a great leap, to be honest, to just stop killing civilians. That doesn't mean they're closer to a democracy. And also, this isn't something that's happened in the past, and we're just getting backlashes from it. It came around in the Beijing Olympics. China was scorned by the international community for moving and executing homeless people in Beijing because it cluttered the streets for foreign tourists. That kind of action is the action that this embargo is aimed to stop. Why does it stop this? The EU, as a collective power, the EU is much more effective than one nation when it embargoes. It's a collection of 20, 30 states, I don't really know how many are in the EU, sorry, but a lot of states collectively say, we do not agree with what you're doing. We are not standing for this. And so, because we do not stand for this, we will limit you in some way. Not limit them as in limit the lives of civilians, but we will say to them, we will not give you what you want. We will really trade with you. I'll take you in a few seconds there. And so we feel that this embargo is particularly effective due to in the subject of arms trading. Yes, I'll take it.
How do you explain the fact that the West does have arms trades with countries such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, other places?
Okay, so Egypt, as far as I know, the trading with arms was pre-Arab Spring, largely. So the trading with it was when we considered it a step government. Of course, new facts do come to light, and yes, perhaps more oversight could be put into that. Trading with Saudi Arabia, however, largely the US does, in fact, trade arms with Saudi Arabia. They are one of the biggest fights of terrorism, and although we may not agree with their regime, although we, and I know this sounds bad, although we may not agree with their regime, they do help us in our goals, which is to stop terrorism. Of course, China doesn't really provide such goals, and also China violates human rights on such a grander scale. And now I'm going to come on to the politics of all this. We kind of why we are doing it as an arms trade, not a general trade embargo. The reason we're doing it as an arms trade is for a myriad of reasons. But one, we don't want to give China any more excuse to attack any regions. There's been in the South China Sea and near Taiwan, there has been a lot of military action. We do not want to continually stoke the fire by providing them with fresh shipments of weapons. That is not a smart idea. Yes, I know China will develop their own weapons, but we, by embargoing them, show that we do not stand for their violence. We can't physically stop them producing weapons, but we can stop them getting weapons from us. It's the most we can do to stop them. This is a good thing, and that's why we stand for the embargo. Also, in the West, we have, I would view, quite a bad military-industrial complex. Wars fuel an arms industry. This arms industry gets richer, so we consider that should we allow this arms industry to trade freely with China, it will only serve these arms companies will get richer, of course. And how do arms companies get richer and richer? More conflict. So should we allow them into places like China? Surely, as we've seen in America, like Lockheed Martin, for example, provide a lot of military equipment for the US, and there has been allegations that George Bush may have been advised by Lockheed Martin on certain issues of terror. We may see similar things happen in China, which may lead to conflict. And of course, conflict is never good. People start dying. That's not good. And also the political action of this embargo, as I mentioned in the POI, and as I'm going to hammer now, is not just for China. It's for anywhere that does not support what we would consider an open democracy or does not take steps to support. Again, they will mention Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia not only is considered America's ally, is actively taking steps in fields like women's rights, LGBT rights have even been evidenced in places in the Middle East. But we actively do embargo places like China, the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan. And these embargoes are important. We can't simply lift them because they're on the way to developing into an Eastern liberal democracy. On the basis of us lifting it now would be a big okay to them. We'd say to them, right now in 2015, we are okay with what your government's doing, and we are okay with what your government's doing to such an extent we will openly trade with you. We see that as very, very bad, because we say that because in 2015 China is not perfect. As I've said, there are still civilian killings, there are still arresting of political opponents, imprisonment of journalists. There are still literally massacres of villages that are in the ways of like roads, dams, etc. Yes, I would.
Why is it then that you actually allow and propose economic trade? That with this money they buy all the weapons that you take?
Yeah, I fully understand your point, but economic trade is not only essential for Europe as a whole. Every half the goods have made in China stand on that. We need that kind of trade in Europe, otherwise our economy stands to standstill. But more importantly, this trade is done, one, largely in good faith that they want to spend it on weapons, but two, we know that their weapons capability, production capability is more limited compared to the West. You only need to look at the superpowers in West arms production, Lockheed Martin and various other companies, to know we produce a hell of a lot more weapons than the rest of the world largely combined. And so we consider that by limiting the amount of weapons they get from us, yes, we give them money, they spend the money on largely what they want, new dams, new roads, yes, the odd machine gun in there, but we consider that by arms embargo is a direct statement to their military that we do not support them in any campaign. So to briefly summarise what I've said, because I spoke very quickly and tried to get through a lot, we don't support China, its human rights are bad. We don't support China's military and the conflicts it's having with Taiwan, and we do not support the spread of the military-industrial complex, which my partner will elaborate on. Thank you, and I beg you to oppose.
There is your speech and comment Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. Team Proposition here remains firmly convinced that we should lift the arms embargo on China because we want, first of all, to improve relations with China and to adapt in an international environment when other countries are also trying to improve those relationships, and we're talking about large powers such as the United States of America and China, and because we also want to take care of the EU internally and to make sure that its role as an economic mission is upheld. But before I actually go on and analyze this point, please allow me to engage in some rebuttal of the team opposition. First of all, we would like to clarify we're talking about the arms embargo because that is the embargo that is in place, and because that is exactly telling of those tense relationships between the EU and China, and therefore as a symbol of that tense relationship, and that not as a developed relationship between the two powers, we want to lift it so that we can have the benefits that I will analyze further. What is more, and on this issue of human rights, first of all, the opposite team claimed that China has been voting against UN things and all of that, and that's why we should not lift the embargo. But what we respond to that is that this is political discrimination, and as we have pointed out, the EU is trading with other regimes that not uphold that democratic standard that they have, and also we find it. We do think it's that the EU should demand from every country, from every developing country that it trades with, to adapt its own very high standards of protection of human rights, of democracy. No, thank you. And China especially is on its course and is making some steps towards the protection of human rights. So first of all, we want to reward that, so to encourage it and take the message across that it's good for them to improve, and that if they continue on that step, maybe the relationship between the EU and the rest of the Western world will improve as the human rights course evolves as well. No, thank you. But what is more, we believe that through improving the relationships between the EU and Russia, then we can make a step towards helping the development of human rights there as well. Because if we have no relation whatsoever, then we have no intercourse. On the other hand, if we actually augment and increase and help the intercourse and the cooperation between the EU and China, then we can help them towards the path of a higher protection of the human rights through establishing better relationships. And therefore, through our measure, it will be easier to help the upholding of human rights rather than through having the embargo in place, and therefore having tense relationships and no intercourse and no relations whatsoever. And that is why I will also be moving on to my first argument, which is, thank you, how we will improve relations with China. As we all know, China is one of the leading economies of the world, and other countries such as Russia or the United States have been trying to take advantage of that economy and trading with China, and which is also why, for example, Russia is currently buying, China is buying weapons from Russia. And therefore, when all the big players in our world are benefiting from some relations with China, we don't want the EU to stay behind, but we need to adapt and be on par with the other large players. So especially now, when there is a general fear that the EU is losing some power, we want to strengthen our ties with Russia and lift with China. And therefore, lifting the ban, the arms ban, the embargo, can help us in establishing a better relation, with this leading economy and remaining on the same level with the other large countries of the world, such as, again, Russia. And the second main reason why we want to lift the ban is because we don't want the EU to start to be targeted and to have divisions from within. During negotiations concerning the embargo, but also later, there has been many disagreements and many divisions. And even now, recently, France and Germany have been talking about lifting the ban. And we have internal voices questioning the validity, the legitimacy, or even the reasons for the embargo. So we don't want to have this gap and to continue having it and allowing it to get bigger. We want to close it in just a moment, sir. And we do not want to allow for this division to grow. Yes, sir.
You mentioned there might be divisions because some people might not like the embargo. Do you not see that if you enact the embargo, there'll be divisions exactly the opposite direction? There'll still be the same line down the middle within Europe.
Yeah, but the largest countries such as France and Germany are talking about lifting the embargo. And what is more, the EU is has many economic mission and is an economic union. And if most countries want to lift the embargo so that they are able to perform the mission that is from the beginning the mission of the EU, which is to strengthen their economies, then they should be allowed to do that, and we shouldn't have the EU imposing and forcing and dictating what their economic policies should be, especially since there has been division, and especially at a time of a crisis when we cannot afford more divisions over such matters. And therefore, exactly because of its economic character and the goal of it, which is to help the economy of the countries grow, which is the main goal of the EU, we believe that we cannot have the EU dictating the policy of countries when they want to lift the ban. So, ladies and gentlemen, because we feel that it is in the interest of the EU to improve their relations with China, not only in order to adapt in the world and to help to improve their own economies and to prevent the establishment of relation with other countries such as Russia or the States, but also because we want to help China develop their own human rights through intercourse, through their reward, and through actually showing that the steps that have made are rewarded, but also because we do not want the EU imposing embargoes when countries don't want them. We believe that the embargo should be lifted. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your speech. I call the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to outline 3 points initially and then go on to some rebuttal. Firstly, the idea that we should be against the military and industrial complex for many reasons, which I'll outline a bit. The idea that China is a potential threat, and such a grave one that we cannot afford to be arming them. Three, the idea that the EU is a model of development and the idea of incentive. But firstly, a point of rebuttal. Germany and France may be discussing the idea of lifting an arms embargo. Is a far cry from, does not necessarily mean that it is a good idea to lift the arms embargo by any means. And secondly, it does not mean that we should lift the arms embargo and that these divisions in Europe will always exist. Like the vast majority of other countries in Europe, the other 24 or whatever, are still pretty much against it. Firstly, the military-industrial complex is a huge force in the world. It makes such a huge amount of money that they're able to lobby politicians. I'm going to basically explain why the military-industrial complex is bad and why we should do everything against it. They have the money to lobby politicians to enact warmongering policies so they can get more money to continue the vicious circle, so they can continue to do this and spread war on a global scale. But China is such a huge market for them that by denying it, we are starving the military-industrial complex of such a large degree of income that we're severely crippling their ability to enact this vicious cycle and continue to warmonger on a global scale. Which brings me on to my second point. China is a legitimate threat to many of our close allies, like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, these places. We actually trade more with these places overall than we do with China. So by offending these places, we stand to lose much more than we gain from opening trade routes with China for arms. These places have a real existential threat to them. Yeah.
And to see that by developing stronger relations with China, our benefits will be much higher, much more than just keeping our relations with Taiwan and countries that are in conflict with China. China is a leading world economy. There's no one.
Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea are also world-leading economies. Samsung alone is owned completely by South Korea. And these countries would respond very terribly to arming their greatest existential threat. They would possibly cut off all trade links with us. And thirdly, the idea that the EU is a model of development for many developing countries like Russia, like China, like India. We should spread the idea that we do not condone warmongering. And we are a genuine role of development. We have the longest lifespans, the greatest healthcare, the higher happiness index. So they will have a real incentive to do things the way we do. They will see that we don't condone the army of dictatorships or anti-authoritarian places. That to get this kind of trade, to be trusted with this kind of trade and improve their economy, they have a real incentive to improve their human rights records, to improve their relations with foreign countries, to just generally be a more... Yeah.
Don't you think that through intercourse and through cooperation, they will have a greater incentive to become more on par with the standards of the European Union on protection of human rights?
Well, it's of course all very well and good, but they need a financial incentive as well. They've shown time and time again they will use political manipulation or the destruction of political opponents. So we feel that perhaps they can't always be trusted with just negotiation. That they might need a monetary incentive as well. I'll take that. Okay. Yeah, they have numerous ways they need to improve. For instance, pollution, the tense relations in this region. If we have something to kind of hold over their head and that for them to strive for, something we can potentially offer them, then we have the ability to ask things of them, to say like, we'll consider lifting the arms embargo if you do this, if you do this thing which we, the EU, like, the idea like, reduce your carbon emissions, improve relations with this area, that sort of thing. Yeah, I'll take your view. Okay. Which leads me back to the military-industrial complex. The idea that the EU itself does not condone warmongering, that everything should be done in terms of peaceful negotiation and mutual respect, rather than a peace wherein everyone's just too afraid to start war because they have so many weapons, cannot last too long. It is something that comes about through economic codependence and that sort of thing. But oh yeah. Also, we have trade partners who are particularly fearful of China, such as Japan, but also the US. The US is afraid that China will overtake its position on the world market as the dominant economic force. By inhibiting China in some way, we are allowing our closer trade partners, the US, to remain on top, to continue to be the dominant force in the world. If we stand even our best possible future with China, our closest links, is still nothing compared to how much we benefit from the US at the moment. And for all these reasons, I beg you to oppose.
Thanks for your speech. I call the member of government.
Dear panel, 3 points of extension for you today from closing government. So firstly, we're going to further clarify the rationale behind the original embargo that the EU has put, and we're going to explain directly, engaging OO's criteria for when exactly do we put embargoes, arms embargoes on different nations, why that logic doesn't stand and isn't relevant to China of today. Secondly, we're going to talk about the meaning of arms embargo in particular, also engaging with some of what we've heard from them. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the impacts and why on the comparative we are much, much better off in a world where we do trade arms with China. Firstly, just quick 3 points of rebuttal to what we heard from previous speakers. So firstly, he talks about, on and on about, the military-industrial complex. So 2 replies to this. We say, A, this is happening anyway, okay? The military-industrial complex is something it's severely hard to be dealt with, because everywhere that we trade and that we have arms trade, no matter where, there will be industries that do cope with steel, with weapons, and they have also always the incentive to put pressures, to lobby, and to actually create more demand for wars. And if we don't trade with them ourselves, then other industries will have this power of lobby. Industries, Eastern industries in Russia and Iran and places such as these, we don't necessarily think that it's better to give them the power to shape our global sphere. Second reply to that is that, well, according to their logic, it seems more consistent if we would say that we need to abolish all arms trade altogether, because we don't never want a military-industrial complex. We think that is unrealistic. Obviously, we do need some arms trade in this world. Second thing, we heard South Korea and Japan will see China as their biggest enemies, and now they will disconnect all of their trade connections with the EU. Not very likely. We say that these countries are hugely dependent on our economy, on their trade with us. We say that Japan, without trading with the West, would have looked like Japan of the 40s. We say that this is exactly the reason why they have progressed so much, why we can trust them. This is where we want to see China in a few years, and we say that this is exactly why we should trade with them, not why we shouldn't. And last point of rebuttal, they say, no, now we will have an ace in our sleeve, right? We can always make them strive to change, because we always have something to fret with them. And we say that no, the actual meaning, and I will explain this in my second point, of giving them this double message. On one hand, we trade with you economically, on the second, not with arms, isn't going to make them strive for change, but going to make them pissed off, not see that we don't trust them, and go towards other directions, which is very bad. They will have no actual incentive to really change for the better, only incentives to change for the worst. So, first point, let's just clarify what was the rationale, why it's not relevant anymore. We say that the actual reason that the embargo started in the first place was in 1989, after Tiananmen Square events, where the Chinese government has actually brought tanks and slaughtered civilians, and then we felt that we could not trust them, and the EU has set this embargo. We say that a lot of change since then. We already get this from opening government, that China isn't in the place that it once has been. But we add something very crucial. We say that they have got this situation because of their trade, economical trade with the West. Because Deng Xiaoping has made his revolution and opened his gates to the West of China, then some of the liberal values have began to flow inside of China. Because now there are executives that sit in board meetings with executives from the US, from the EU. They go there. They actually send their children to schools in the EU and in the West. This is what, and then they of course come back and they are spreading those democratic values. These are exactly the reasons why we see progressiveness in China, such as now they have property rights, which they didn't once have, and of course we don't think situation is perfect, but we think that in order to be consistent with our effort towards progressing China, then we need to remove the other bans that we have on trading with them, draw them closer to us. This is exactly what will get us to more human rights. We say that the criteria that we get from opening opposition is that, well, when we don't have democratic states, we simply don't trade arms with them. I've already shown to him in my POI where this is false factually, and then he tried to skirmish away and he said something like, well, Saudi Arabia is actually promoting LGBT rights and women's rights. This is absolutely false, that we don't believe that there's any place more horrible in the world for women than in Saudi Arabia, where they're not allowed to drive, they're not allowed to show their faces, and things such as. So what do we get from that? We get that the actual criteria that we have on when do we trade with other countries is not democratic values, is when there's a risk of abuse from government to this specific weapons. And we say that in China this isn't relevant anymore because there's great stability in China, because now some democratic values have managed to infiltrate and the values have changed. We say actually that places that are not stable is places when the government is afraid of the citizens and afraid of a coup, and then it's more likely that he will use this to abuse its citizens. This isn't happening in China now. Okay, next point. Impact. The meaning of weapons. So, if there's any questions from closing, I would love to take them now. No. Okay. So, meaning of weapons. We say that as long as we are inconsistent and the embargo remains, what we actually get, what the message that China is actually getting is that we don't trust them. Okay? We are okay to trade with you economically, but not give you actual power in your hands. We say that this drives them to be angry about the West. We see this already in the economical sphere, where they are opening alternative banks, world banks, and they're opening alternative institutions because they see that the West isn't trusting them enough and doesn't give them enough power. So they go and they use their power in other ways to actually gain power. They're not giving it up, they're only going to other directions. This is what drives them to trade with Iran for weapons. Of course, this money that they get is already used in places where they don't want them used, in the South China Sea and all these places. Plus, the money that Iran is getting is going to Hezbollah and other places of terror, which destabilizes the entire region. So impacts, eventually, we're coming to a few impacts. Firstly, money. We're already getting from OG that now that this will allow great flow of money into Europe. We add to this that Europe is now in a crucial situation where it actually needs this money, because Germany has spent so much out of order, so much money on Greece and such. We actually need this money. Secondly, improvement of human rights in China. We already proved to you why this is true. And thirdly, we say that this drives them closer to the West, which of course stabilizes us as the West, and not striving China, which is a great financial force, towards our most devious enemies that don't respect human rights and that destabilize the entire area. And for these reasons, we beg you to propose.
Thanks for your speech. I call a member of opposition.
We see now that China does not have any problem of getting any arms. So we see that this embargo does not influence their army in any way. They have one of the strongest army in Asia. And we also see that, yes, economic trade that still remains, and we still cooperate with China on economic basis, did actually, even though embargo exists, that economic trade actually brought some of the development in democratic values of China. But we see that that is not enough, and that China still remains a very closed system, and there are many violations of LGBT rights. There are people who have different political beliefs are in prison. Many journalists are in prison. So we see that it's still not a great situation, and we see that we believe that we should remain strong economic relations with China, but we must keep this embargo, because it sends a great symbolic message to the government of China and to the world. And we believe that European Union actually have great soft power, and we believe that that is why it actually should keep this embargo as kind of symbolic message that it sends to China's government. Because it does not affect their citizens. Before my arguments, few points of response about Saudi Arabia. Well, we believe that actually European Union does not have power to oppose embargo on Saudi Arabia, although it maybe should have done it. But we believe that we know that many countries in European Union are actually in NATO, and that NATO is ally with Saudi Arabia, and we believe that that is not the case with China. And precisely because we have power to actually send some message to China government, we should do it. About the alternative banks, that we believe that that is not the question whether China believes West or not. That is, China is doing that for many others economic reasons, and we believe that that a lifting embargo won't actually change that situation much.
Okay, first, soft power of Europe. We believe that soft power of Europe is something that is very historically important, and we believe that they, through history, always had that power to send a message and to promote human rights in many countries. We see that in South Africa, we see that now in Ukraine or in ex-countries of Soviet Union. We believe that or sanctions on Russia, and we believe that that kind of message that is sent through some sanctions, such as this embargo, actually can send a very strong message to the government. And we believe that actually that kind of actions that European Union is doing is actually very much valued in the world, because they don't have strong military force. China will not get will not increase benefit from suddenly trading with European Union, but they can influence in promoting values through some political decision that they stick on. And we believe if we lift this embargo of China, we are giving up on those principles. We are giving up on those principles where we say, yes, we can trade with you, we can have all economic benefits from each other, but we still do not approve your system, and we still think that you are a closed and political oppressed system. I believe that this embargo, which does not influence on the economic relations much, is the best way to do it, because it does not have many impact on Chinese citizens, only on its government, and we believe that that's the way it should remain the same, because we believe that we still have not, China has not still reached the level where it has developed many strong economic rights. What more are we doing with this? We believe that we actually, if we lift embargo, we actually, European symbolically approves of all military actions and of all regimes that China supports. And we believe that China still supports some regimes, such as North Korea, that has very severe, much more severe violation of human rights. And they actually have food supply from China that actually can remain such strong dictatorship only because China actually supports them. And we believe that we should not, that is also a message that we send, that we actually, all the military actions and some internal diplomacy that China is doing is actually okay with us. And we believe that also it's kind of brings hypocrisy to actually measures that European Union impose, such as on Russia. We believe that China now trades with Russia, and we often have arguments that they should not do it because China does not promote human rights, and we also put some sanctions on Russia on the same basis, because they violate human rights and because they violate international laws. And we believe that this is kind of hypocritical, because now Russia can act more aggressive towards European Union, because now they lose the argument that they have still some soft power over and some power actually to impose embargo on arms on such strong country as China. Okay, go.
No, aggressive rhetoric occurs when there isn't close trade relations. But you agree that there is no way to stop China from acquiring these weapons. All you get is a vague message. Financial trade, yes. Arms trade, no. What do you think that this will drive China towards?
Well, we believe that neither in your case we have the same situation as you described. Only in our comparatively in our world, we still have that message that is we believe that is very much important, and we still have that official attitude of European Union that China is still not developed enough, and that it is still not developed as good democratic values as it should. And we believe that we actually don't gain any much, and we don't change any much. We only lose that soft power that Europe has over China, and it still has, even though all the even though it trades, and it cannot actually stop China from trading with them. Yeah, as we saw, we believe that Russia will actually act even. There will be no soft power left over for Europe to actually promote those values that it stands upon throughout its history. So, please propose.
There is the speech on behalf of the government.
3 points of bash for you today. One, well, is the embargo still legitimate? Secondly, well, China will be more likely to engage in war? And thirdly, is it beneficial for the EU? But for 2 external points of rebuttal. First point of rebuttal, we get to this idea of a message. We have a message that will change the notion of China. We have 2 things for saying. A, it wasn't proven at any point that this will be the interpretation of the message. We say, if we don't trade with you, the message is, maybe, we can speculate, that you are not like us, that you will never adopt those ideas, therefore China will be even more violate human rights. Secondly, we find it awfully weird that on one sentence they said, China is a very closed country and doesn't listen to the EU, and on the other hand she's saying, oh, they're going to listen to your message. So we say, even if the message is passing with your interpretation, nobody is going to listen to this message. We say, when on the comparative, when we have trade, we have an ability to persuade the message that we want, therefore we'll get more human rights on our side. Second point of rebuttal, say, well, Russia will support North Korea, Russia, and so on and so forth. We say, one, if you're fearing about weapons, you already said that they have shitloads of weapons, sorry, this is my friend, a lot of weapons, so it's not about the quantity of weapons that they have, because they have a lot of weapons. Secondly, we say, the entire reason that supporting North Korea and Russia is because we are not engaging with them. You don't giving them a good alternative. Say, when we'll be there, to the very least, there'll be less support of North Korea and China because they'll have an alternative to trade with the EU. Therefore, in our side, we get more less support for Russia and other countries. To my constructive, to the summation. Is the embargo still legitimate? So what happened in the first half is the following. OG say, well, today's China is not Mao's China, and OO say, well, we agree that it's not Mao's China, but our criteria is that we don't support regimes that violate human rights. Pay attention, we didn't get a single justification for why we don't, why is this the relevant criteria. And they're saying, and we give you the counterexample of Saudi Arabia. And in response they say, well, in Saudi Arabia, we really don't have an option as the EU because we're so petite, small, and we can't affect the discourse of the world to stop the embargo with them. Guys, nonsense. The EU has one of the strongest economy in the world, has one of the strongest armies in the world. Geographically, it's located like spot on in the middle, so it could send missile or be a threat for trade, and so on and so forth. It means that we have the power to stop trading with Saudi Arabia. We just don't think this is the right criteria, the violation of human rights. The right criteria, and Siav explains to you, is when there is a fear of abuse of power. And what is the justification for this criteria? Because when we have a stable regime that doesn't abuse this power, we get more geographical stability. Why do we get more geographical stability? Because countries that are stable don't want to engage in war because A, it's costly, secondly, it's not politically effective for them, and thirdly, it's destabilizing the entire region and makes things more shaky. This does not take place when regimes in Africa are not as stable. This is why we don't trade with them when we do trade with China, because it's a more stable region. Now, we say in the case of, this is specifically in the case of China, because we have tight communication with them through A, trade, B, the EU, and C, through some sort of culture, means that there is a rational regime there that we can speak to and make sure that there is a stable region. So on the bottom line, there is no more legitimacy to not trading with them. Now I'll take opening.
Okay, so you mentioned that if we trade with them, they'll suddenly leave Russia and North Korea. Do you not see that Russia and North Korea are allies of convenience because they hold the same dictator-based ideals?
False. It's not what I'm claiming. I'm claiming that they'll support them less because they have an alternative. On the comparative between absolutely supporting Russia and have some sort of EU trade, I'll go with the second option. Secondly, will China be more likely to engage in war? So let's take down their argument of lobbyists are going to encourage war because there will be more arms there. First of all, we say it's not consistent with the entire idea of trade there, which wasn't engaged even though we gave them a chance now. Secondly, we say on the status quo, there are enough incentive for those lobbyists to try and make sure that there will be war. We don't understand what is the delta specifically trading with the EU that will make sure that a war take place. And thirdly, we say even if those traders will take place, we need to balance between two ideas. One are the lobbyists that are pushing, and the second one is that we create trust from the EU. Now let's analyze specifically when China, okay, a country that wants to have stability, will engage in war. So it will take place only when it's feared for its self-defense. We'll say the likelihood for China to fear for its self-defense is when it has no armed relations with the EU. We create more arms relations with the EU. China will trust more the EU. Therefore, the effectiveness of the lobbyists will decrease, because effectively, when the lobbyists come to the prime minister and says, "Well, guys, things are going to be really bad. You should start war to make sure it's not shaky," you say, "Man, I have the EU on my back. We're trading. It's pretty good. I don't see why I should start engaging in this war." So on the bottom line, we get a more calm regime with China, and the impact is we have less likelihood for war. Thirdly, about the benefit from the EU. So OG says, well, we're gonna help solve disputes between Germany and France. We think this is, as they say, those disputes occur anyway. Okay, so we have Germany between Germany and the other region, but we give you 3 extensions of the impact. A, financially, we say we have trade that is made for win. Now they say we have trade, but our extension is why this trade is so crucial. We say that unemployment in Spain is skyrocketing. We say that Germany just pay a huge bailout. We say that Greece is extremely unstable. Guys, we need this money now, and it's really critical for the euro, so the impact is more economical stability. Secondly, about human rights. Say the human rights will improve, but we explain to you why human rights will improve. We say the trade basically is the notion that passes on ideas. We say when you sit down in the negotiation, and I have my European values, I transfer them to the other side. Now, this is key specifically for arms trading, because the people that are most likely to violate human rights are people that are holding arms, okay, because they have the power. Now, we make sure that you sit with them, you transfer your European values, and now there is less abuse. Pay attention on the comparative, they are sitting with Iranian, they're sitting with dubious countries that make sure that there will be more abuse around. And thirdly, we say we stabilize the region because there is more trust between the countries, so the likelihood for war is lessened. So on the bottom line, we stabilize the region, the EU economically, and we progress in China toward the future. Overall, we get a more stabilized war, and progressing China for the future, we beg you to propose.
I'll try to sum up this debate in 3 main questions or points. First, which consequences actually will this measure make? Second thing, more explanation about how it actually comes to changing of human rights and improving of rights in some countries, and why is actually EU the country which is currently someone who is able to influence others, and why such measure would harm that? Just one quickly point of rebuttal, and other will be incorporated in constructive. All the story about the war and less chances for the war if the EU is on our side, on China's side. We don't. I'm not quite sure that I understand that point. First, because that is not the EU who have the hugest army. Actually, China is the one who have the hugest standing army in the world, and we don't see that they need to help cooperation with EU in order to not go to the war. The China simply not, especially if we watch in relations China towards other country, which China is can have some problems. We say that China is the hugest. Have the hugest army and more power towards that countries, but the reason why they don't go to war is that because it isn't in their interest, because they trade with other countries and so on. So we don't see any benefits from all your points about that. Yeah. So which consequences will we have? First, they said that situation is changing. Yeah, we agree. We currently don't have the civil war on the streets of China. But what we still see as a problematic is that every year the annual report or the most relevant global human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch every year talk about the harming of human rights in China. Always talking about not giving the rights to NGOs, to groups which try to organize and to do something about improving rights and freedom of people in that country. This is what we see in the most relevant reports in the world. The second thing is, what is very important is the question about the North Korea. Yeah, we have the country which damaging the human rights of that people, probably one of the worst cases in the world. And what we see that literally every country is imposing sanctions to North Korea. And we have the example when China is literally slapping all the other countries in the moment when they are providing the huge part of GDP of North Korea towards the help which coming from the China. And it is estimated that that's the main reason why the North Korea's president is still in power. The only reason is because of the help of China, and this is also the most. It is estimated that if they will cut their ties with North Korea, that regime wouldn't stay in power anymore. And this is exactly when they indirectly harming the human rights of people of that country, and all the time when they using veto in order to protect irresponsible acting of North Korea. This is when they show us that the situation isn't so perfect and that they are still protecting the acting which can harm the human right. And
you have China, which is a borderline, some human rights, but not enough. Where can you influence it more? When they sit with you in board meetings or with Iranian executives?
This is exactly what is my second point. How are we actually changing the human rights of country? Or improving or sharing our values. This is not when it comes to selling weapons to someone. This is when it comes to our soft power, to our possibility to share our values. And this is what happening when we trade, when we share the cultural values, when you exchange students, travel more, cooperate more, exchanging knowledge and other things with other countries. And this is exactly what is happening even in the status quo. All the things that this is why that countries are improving their values. But what makes EU the good character to share other values is that because EU is currently seen as someone who is always on the right side, who is not compromising with their values and who is not compromising with their values. And we say that in the moment when, as I already explained, why the situation isn't good in China. And in the moment when you accept that and support such country and decide to trade with weapons with some country, this is the moment when you compromise your standing, your values, the things which you standing as, which you claiming as the most important for you. And this is the moment when you're harming your soft power, your ability to be presented like someone who is always on the right side, who is trying to improve human rights on the other country. And we believe that it is harming this is harming the soft power of EU. But we also see that in the moment when you, as someone who is currently seen as someone who is always trying to promote that values of freedom of the human rights, when you decide to say to make that step and to say that you perfectly agree with all the things which are currently happening in China, you're just putting yourself in the position to say that you're completely alright with what is happening there with government of China and with all their acting. And in that moment, you're just slowing down that process of changing things because you're stepping on their side and agreeing that this is all right with you. So because of all this reason, because we believe that situation in China isn't perfect, and we explain why, because the human rights in that country aren't respected enough, because all the things with North Korea, because this will harm the soft power in EU in the future, and their ability to change things and to share their values in the future, and because we don't want to compromise our values, and to slowing down the changes which are currently happen even in the moment when we don't trade, even at the moment when we don't sell weapons to China, because we will slowing down the process which is currently happening. We beg you to oppose.